I was going to start with a bit of your background yourself. What was drawing people into the priesthood when you started, or when you became a priest or got ordained?
Well, I suppose religion at that time, I was born in 1948.
Yeah.
1966 I did my Leaving Cert. And at that stage it was just taken for granted that the first thing you would consider, I went to a diocesan boarding school, that the first decision you made about your life was whether you would be a priest or not a priest. And then if you decided not to become a priest, then you picked something else, the teaching or the Gardaí or the bank or something like that. But the first question always was, would you be a priest or would you not be a priest? And everybody was, in a sense, asked that question. So it was very much part of the culture of the day. And at that stage I had a brother who was already in the seminary and who was ordained, and another brother in the seminary who wasn't ordained, who left. So at the time it was sort of taken for granted that religious life was just part and parcel of the weather of the times.
Yeah.
So you decided. I suppose what would have attracted me to it would be that we were encouraged to sort of make a commitment to something that was good. In other words, what can you give your life in service of? What is the best thing you can do? And the priesthood was obviously presented to us as an alternative, either the diocesan priesthood or religious priesthood in a religious order.
And do you think those attractions still exist today?
They don't.
No.
The weather is different, the culture is different, I think, because I think if you went into a school now and talked to Leaving Cert students and said the first decision you have to make is for priesthood or not for priesthood, they wouldn't understand what you were saying a lot of them. They wouldn't think about it, they wouldn't contemplate it. And that's because the whole culture of the day is completely and utterly different.
How has it changed?
Well, it's changed in the sense that that time the church had the wind on its back. The church was in a very strong position. It was very much part of the social fabric of the day. Everybody went to Mass effectively. There might be a few people who didn't go to Mass, but in a way I suppose at parish missions they were kind of rounded up, if you like, at parish missions, and they came back to the church. It was taken for granted that people would. So the church people were very, very much admired. The church had huge authority. Bishops were extremely significant figures of authority. People listened to them when they had something to say. The coverage they got for their pastoral letters and all the rest of it, blanket coverages on local paper, and there weren't local radios at that stage. But the attitude of the church was completely different.
Yeah.
So now a person making a decision, when I made the decision, the wind was on my back, my family were very happy with it, my community were very happy about it. Now if somebody made a decision to go on for priesthood, the family usually wouldn't be very happy about it, and usually the community would be disinterested in it, or wouldn't feel they were supporting them or whatever. So it's very much the wind on the face of anybody now who's making a decision to become a priest, is really running counter to the culture of the day.
In your book you mentioned even if it's a religious family, the parents still wouldn't be kind of against.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you think that attitude, that shift in attitude, it's kind of the church's own fault that's happened?
To some degree, but I think a lot of it has happened in that when I was growing up as in the national school, the primary school and secondary school and so on, in the 50s and in the early 60s, the church was sort of listened to very much. And what the church said was just taken as the gospel truth. And just to give you an example of that, we'd say the whole contraception thing in terms of marriage and families. It was looking back at the statistics now in terms of parishes and so on, you can see the huge number of the huge families there were, 10 and 11 and 12 and 13. Now there are 2, sometimes 1, sometimes 3 or whatever, smaller families. And the difference is that young couples of childbearing age are not now listening to what the church is saying. They're saying, we'll make our decision on that. And I think when it comes to a decision about someone going on for the priesthood or the religious life, parents, and I see them in this parish and they're very good supporters of the church and very strong Catholics and very spiritual people and so on, would be unhappy if their son or daughter decided to become a priest or nun, because they would feel that it's a very isolated life, it's a very difficult life, it's a lonely life, and they would also sort of, looking at the child sexual abuse scandals, they'd have the feeling that maybe, well, is there something strange about this kind of life? And I would prefer my son or my daughter to be married and have a family and do the ordinary things that I have done, sort of thing,
Yeah.
That's what they would be saying to them. So the whole force, the whole impetus of the culture is against making a permanent commitment to a life of celibacy, and in our situation here, say in a diocese like Killala Diocese, to living on your own, because you live on your own, because we've so few priests, we're all out in different places in the country, and that would be the way it works.
One of my favourite quotes in the book is you saying the issue of celibacy, and you say that it's kind of celibacy is there so the priests can devote more time to the community.
Yes.
But it also means a more lonelier life.
Yes.
But it gets to an extent where life is so lonely that the priest, you say, use the whiskey priest. Everybody knows the whiskey priest.
Yes, yeah.
Would that be a massive issue?
It isn't, no, but I think there's a breakdown. There was a clerical culture that supported priests, in the sense that there were a lot of us in it, first of all, and we were from all the different age groups. This is going back now to the 50s and 40s and so on. So there was great support. You were part of a great movement of people, having the support of the community and having support of families and so on. But the numbers were big, and there was a lot of what we would call sort of coming together as priests in groups, whether it was playing cards or playing golf or particular interests people would have that they would share with one another and so on and so forth. Now there's no kind of common priestly life because there are so few of us. And because we're all of a particular age. Like in our diocese, for example, now we have, I think it's one person under 40, and we have a few under 50. So most of us are kind of in our 50s, 60s and 70s. So there was a time when, there was a kind of culture of support and solidarity and so on. So somebody coming into that now, imagine a guy 25 years of age being ordained and saying to himself, like, what's my future in this? I'm going to be on my own effectively for all of my life, and I'm going to be in a diocese where the parish will be amalgamating, there'll be very few priests, so there's that air of uncertainty about the future, and I think that's impinging on people who are thinking about the decision, maybe not thinking about it that much, but are prepared to kind of contemplate it, but they're put off from it by that kind of reflection.
What else would kind of put young people off, would you think? Like if there
I
was
would
a young
think
man who wanted to join the priesthood and he might have second doubts.
Yes. Well, I think an example would be, someone told me a number of years ago, now maybe about 7 or 8 years ago, of a girl who was going home from Dublin, and her brother was a student in Maynooth, and he said, call for me now, I'll be able to go home this Friday evening or whatever, and she kind of put him off, and behind it all was the fact that she was embarrassed that her brother would be actually going off for the priesthood. Now this was at the height of the child sexual abuse scandals and so on and so forth. So when I'm talking about the drift of the culture, the fact that the culture isn't supportive, I mean, it's very difficult for somebody at 18 years of age to know what they want, but it's very difficult for somebody to choose something that is so countercultural and to choose something that they know is going to be an isolated life and to a large degree a lonely life and a separate life, to choose that at 18 years of age. So everything is running against them, and that's why the statistics are such. I mean, the priesthood in Ireland is imploding. In our diocese, for example, the estimate would be we would have 7 to 8 priests in 20 years' time in 22 parishes, and that's covering kind of half the county of Mayo and a big slice of the county of Sligo. So it's collapsing. So like, who would want to join an organisation where collapse is written on all over it? And that's very difficult for people to make that decision now.
And what steps do you think the church can take to avoid the collapse?
Well, the church has to do something, and Pope Francis would certainly give us reason for believing that he may take the decisions that are needed to be taken. But the church always arrives at a situation a bit breathless and a bit late. We're always kind of in catch-up kind of situation. And to my generation, it seems patently obvious that, for example, the Eucharist Mass is much more important than, say, celibacy. Celibacy is a man-made rule that was introduced in the church around the 12th century. Now, it wasn't actually implemented to a large degree in Ireland until maybe centuries later. I do a bit of history myself, and you come across things that aren't reflected maybe in general history, but in the 16th century, for instance, the Vatican sent Father David Wolfe, a Jesuit, to Ireland because they were anxious that the reforms of Trent and all of this would be introduced into Ireland. And he fell out of the Irish bishops because he wanted the bishops to set aside their concubines or their mistresses. Now that's the 16th century. So celibacy in that sense in the church is quite recent. And At the moment, we have difficulty in the church because it's a huge, huge decision that will have repercussions. But unless, in some sense, a decision is made around celibacy, we're not going to have the Eucharist. And if you haven't the Eucharist, if you haven't Mass, you haven't church. So we're in a fiercely critical situation, and I'm a member of the Association of Catholic Priests, and we would be trying to draw attention to this. We'd be pleading with the bishops, pleading with them to try and tell Rome and tell the authorities in the church that the church in Ireland is absolutely on the verge of utter collapse because the Eucharist, the Mass, is disappearing. Now, at the moment what we're doing is we're clustering parishes. We are here with Crossmolina Parish and Laherdown Parish. And what's going to happen is there are 5 of us in 3 parishes. So if I die or I retire or moved, 4 will be left to take the 3 parishes. The next guy out, there'll be 3 left. The next guy out, there'll be 2. The next guy out, there'll be just 1 left for 3 parishes. And he'll be in his 60s or early 70s.
Yeah.
So what we're saying is the Mass, this community, for example, Magown, a small parish, has had for right back to the 7th century, has had the Eucharist. Like over the river there, there's an old graveyard, Killinishask graveyard, and there was a monastery there. It's disappeared completely now. There isn't a trace of it left. But there was a monastery there. We know from history that there was a monastery there. So from the 7th century to the 21st century, this parish of Magowna had at the heart of it Mass on the weekend, where people gathered from different places for the Eucharist. And it was the centre of their spirituality, it was the centre of their lives, it sustained them as Catholic people. That's going to disappear. So, what will happen to this parish? This parish will effectively disappear. People have to go to Crossmolina or into Ballina to get the Eucharist. So, you have a whole scaffolding of parishes in a diocese like Killala Diocese that's absolutely ready to collapse. And in 20 years' time, it will be gone. So, the question I would have is, if it's that obvious, why don't we make the changes? And we will make the changes, I've no doubt about it. I mean, firstly, what's going to happen in the Catholic Church, I'm not a great prophet in seeing this, it has to happen. So, I mean, it's the writing, in a sense, is on the wall, it's very clear. The first thing that's going to happen is they're going to ordain married men. The second thing that's going to happen is they're going eventually to have optional celibacy. And the third thing, eventually, they will ordain women. Now, they'll ordain women in 3 centuries' time, maybe. I don't know how long it will take. But that's the movement. And it has to go in that direction. Because unless the Christian religion engages with the culture of the day, it disappears. And we can see that in Ireland. We're not engaging with people at a level that will help them to understand, what the message is and what it can do for them as people. So the answer to the problem, to some degree, is changing some of the structures that we have. And I have no doubt that when they put their heads together in Rome, and if Francis can convince the other cardinals or whatever, there will be change. But the church arrives, we will lose out because a lot of the damage has been done because the thing is collapsing,
Do you think there's a culture of denial in the Catholic Church?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And the whole clericalist thing, like the Irish bishops, and this isn't an exaggeration, are absolutely and utterly out of touch with what's happening with parishes. Absolutely and utterly out of touch with what's happening in parish. A lot of priests, and I will include myself in that, are out of touch with the lived reality of people's lives. There isn't a connection being made between what these people understand, what people are saying at parish level, and what bishops and priests, very many priests, understand what's happening. Because we don't want to believe it. I remember I was in Ballina for years, and the bishop used to come in every year at confessions, and he'd say, I think we have more for confessions this Christmas now than we had last Christmas. It was patently untrue. And eventually someone said to him, no, you're wrong. There was much fewer this Christmas than there was last Christmas. We could see it falling year on year. But for him, no, it was grand. Because there is a kind of a culture among priests and among bishops is, this will do in my time. I'm 66, coming 66 years of age. So I'm ready to retire in a few years' time. So why would I initiate a whole, renewal thing in Magowna Parish? Because I'm on my way out of it, And there's that kind of thing. I'll be only bishop for years, or parish priest for a few years, or a curate in this parish for years. Why would I bother when the whole run is against me? And nobody is recognising, this elephant in the living room that's so clear to everybody, but that people are not prepared to. They keep moving around it, but they won't name it.
That's coming from the top, though. Even Dermot Martin, Archbishop Dermot Martin, he still thinks there are young people who are willing to live lives the way priests lived lives 30, 40 years ago.
That's right.
And there's no acceptance that, as you just said,
Yes.
that there's a different culture for young people in Ireland.
Yeah.
One of the main things that the Catholic Church are doing to try and integrate younger new priests is kind of bringing African priests over to Ireland, reverse missionaries.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on the reverse missionaries?
Well, just on the Dermot Martin thing, the Associated Catholic Priests asked the Irish bishops to meet them, and they wouldn't meet us. They don't want to talk about this because they know what we're going to say. We're going to say, look, it's going to be over in 20 years' time. What are you going to do about it? You're the bishops. You're the leaders of the church. So we met. Eventually, they agreed to meet the councils of priests at the